Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spring HHEI event, Heller-Hurwicz Economics Institute event, featuring Chad Syverson, Tom Holmes, and our moderator, Zenas Hutchinson, on competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing. Thank you all for coming in this beautiful spring day. I'm Chris Phelan, the chair of the Department of Economics, and on behalf of the Department of Economics and the Heller-Hurwicz Economics Institute, again, welcome and thanks for making it. Our moderator today is Zenas Hutchinson. He is for the few years that I've known him now, a friend, and he's a great friend of the department and a great board member and great friend of the Heller-Hurwicz Economics Institute. He's a venture partner with Econ Venture Partners, an early-stage venture capital fund focused on investing in early-stage information technology companies in the enterprise segment with offices in Menlo Park, California, where it's also snowing. No. And here. Previously, Zenas co-founded Vestbridge Partners, LLC, and was a senior managing director. He was also St. Paul Venture Capital's co-managing general partner and the managing general partner of the networking and IT team within St. Paul Venture Capital. Prior to joining SPVC, Zenas was a turnaround specialist in the high-tech arena for nearly 20 years, serving as a senior advisor or board member to over 35 companies. He earned a BA in chemistry at Dartmouth and has his MBA from the University of Chicago. GSB, or is it Booth? Do they backdate it? Do they backdate it? Zenas serves on several boards, including Corville, Metratech, TA Labs, Q Factor, and most importantly, the Heller-Hurwicz Economics Institute. Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks again, Chris. So our topic tonight is U.S. manufacturing and its competitiveness in the global economy. And as most of you are aware, the trends in U.S. manufacturing are abysmal over the last 30 to 40 years. For example, and if you look at it in terms of employment, in 1977, more than 1 in 5 non-government employees worked in the manufacturing sector. By 2010, this number was less than 1 in 10. I'm sorry, by 2007, it was less than 1 in 10. So we fell from roughly 22% to just under 10%. In terms of the share of GDP, U.S. manufacturing has fallen from roughly 24% in 1970 to under 13% in 2009. So these are dramatic transformations, dramatic restructuring of America, or the U.S.'s global position in manufacturing. So to help us understand that transformation, we have two excellent economists to speak to us today. First is Tom Holmes. Tom is the Curtis L. Carlson Professor of Economics at the University of Minnesota. In his spare time, he is a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis and a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research. He has his undergraduate degree in economics from UPenn and his PhD, master's and PhD in economics from Northwestern University. Tom's research deals with the disappearance of recent research deals with the disappearance of large manufacturing plants in the U.S. And I had the pleasure of reading that paper this weekend and found it fascinating. It went into detail about how the furniture industry, particularly in what is the North Carolina or the Piedmont region, has been dramatically reshaped by a surge in Chinese imports. Tom has additionally investigated the impact of unionized labor on the decisions of on where to locate new plants and whether or not to expand current plants. So both of those are very interesting topics. So our second speaker will be Chad Syverson, and Chad is the J. Baum Harris Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. He is also a research associate at the National Board of Economic Research. And interestingly, he's a board member of the Chicago Census Research Data Center. He, being somewhat of an underachiever, only has 2 bachelor's degrees, one in economics and one in mechanical engineering, and he has his PhD from the University of Maryland. His research is focused on the interactions of firm structure, market structure, and productivity. And I think he'll be sharing some of that as it relates to how manufacturing has been transformed and his views of what might happen going forward. So the format is Tom will speak for 25 minutes, followed by Chad. Then I'll ask the panel a question or two, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questioning. One rule is you can't ask a question unless you're recognized and have a mic in your hand. And the gentleman here will be, and we've got a couple of other spotters, will be passing out the mics. And please keep your questions short and to the point and focused on the subject at hand. This is not a platform. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, so this mic is working. Excellent. Let's see about this. There we go. Well, thank you all for coming on this awful weather night. We're here to talk about manufacturing and U.S. competitiveness, and this is a topic that I think is very important and interests me a lot. And so I've several different projects, and I'm excited about them all. So I tried to figure out a way to combine them all into this talk. So I'm a bit scattered in the sense I'm going to go over a variety of topics, but I will be posting links. So if you want to follow up and see, the underlying papers behind these, and then afterwards we can talk about some more details. But we'll start with, let's see. This is an overview. As Ian's brought up, manufacturing, in terms of employment, the decline is dramatic. What I'm going to be focusing on, though, is what happens if we look at the large employer plants, the real big ones. And we're going to see things are even more dramatic. Okay? And so what I want to talk about, well, what's going on with why we're losing all these large employer plants. And then I want to talk about policy. All right? And then some of you will be thinking, well, since the crisis, we've been hearing a big story about some of the turnaround. All right? Is that real or not? And Chad's going to have a lot to say about that. Okay? So I'll just start off with this table, and I'm going to be using, census numbers here, the economic census. It is held every 5 years on, years that end in 2 and 7. So we've got the last one that we have is the 2007 census. Okay, now there's 2012, of course, but it takes a while to process, right? Plus, there's the crisis and all that stuff happening, and then we'll just save that for Chad, okay? But so let's just start with 2007 and look at the top row here. Manufacturing employment is 13.4 million. If we go back 10 years, 16.8 million. So we've lost 3.4 million jobs in manufacturing over just that 10-year period, okay? And that's an acceleration of a decline. Go back to 87, it was 17.7 million. But you see that the most recent, it's just a big drop, okay? But what if we narrow our focus to the really large employer plants, those with more than 1,000 employees in the building, all right? I mean, maybe production employees, engineers, whatever, more than 1,000 employees, okay? And what we're going to see here is even bigger drops, okay? And then actually, over a longer period of time, and you go back to 77, there were 5.1 million workers in these plants with more than 1,000. And then lost 1 million, down to 4.2, lost another million down to 3.2, lost another million down by 2.2, right? And so you can see this is proportionally larger than just a decline overall. So there's something happening to those real large employer plants. And maybe it might help to just conceptualize, just count how many there are. Okay, so now we'll just look at counts, 1,000 or more. So one of them would have been that over in St. Paul there, that Ford plant, right? We all know about that. That had more than 1,000 employees and shows up here. It's gone now, but 2007 is still around, okay? But what we're going to see here is that of those kind of plants, we had 2,077. 10 years later, 1,700. 10 years later, 1,500. 10 years later, only 1,000. And it's even sharper if we look at those plants with more than 5,000 employees, those monster plants, right? Back in 77, we had almost 200. Lost about 50, 100, down to 150, down to about 100. Down to only 49. It almost looks like if we look 10 years hence to 2017, we'll be down to 0. But I don't think it's going to be quite that. But you can see just really big decline. All right, so what do I have to say about that? All right. Okay, so the first point I want to make, Econ 101 is going to go really far. All right. Well, in fact, at Minnesota, our classes are so good that they get 4 digits. All right? So here, it's Econ 1101 that goes really far. All right? And so what I mean by that, what is one of the first lessons we learn? In a competitive market, the lowest cost provider is going to win. Okay? He's going to get the work. All right? Now, what is cost? Well, you would include production costs, but also transportation costs or any inconvenience, right? And then we're also going to control per unit of quality. All right, so let's hold this thought for a minute, and let's talk about a fact. All right, I'm obviously not in a business school like Chad, who's going to be pretty slick with this stuff. Okay, Econ works, yeah? Yeah? Oh, no, man. Whoa, this is... Oh, wow, I'm giving the store away. Come on. Okay, sorry about this. Here we are, fact. I got this. Okay, let's start off with something we all know. In some industries, you can find a, like a hot dog stand. It's going to be very small, okay? Steel mill, huge. We all understand that. All right, big differences because of industry. Right? In our Econ 1101 class, we'll draw these different size curves. Well, for this industry, it looks like this. This industry, it's all out here. Okay? But here's something else. Even when we look at very narrowly defined industries, as narrow as the census has an industry classification, what we find is huge variations even then when they're making reportedly the same thing, at least according to the census. All right? So if we look at wood furniture, for example, we can find factories with more than 2,500 workers, and at the same time, factories with only 1 or 2. Okay, now the standard approach in economics of thinking about this is, okay, well, more productive firms or plants are going to get big, and that's what's going to drive it, all right, drive these size variations, right? And that has an important implication when you think about what's going to happen when imports come in, because those big efficient guys are going to be able to withstand the imports, and it'll be the smaller plants in the industry that disappear. Okay. Now, of course, that's true to some extent. I mean, Walmart is big and grew, and Kmart declined because obviously Walmart's more efficient than Kmart. Okay. But I have this work I have with John Stevens emphasizes another important fact that within narrowly defined industries, the big plants are doing something different than the small plants, all right? In particular, they're more likely to be the big guys are doing the standardized stuff, and the smaller are doing specialty. Okay, so let's see if I can get this right. Okay. All right, so I can't. All right, sorry about this. Which way? This way? No. I'm sorry. Okay. So, all right. So where I'm going with this is we have these standardized goods. Right? Just imagine they're maybe say wood furniture, but not the fancy kind of stuff, but something you would sort of a moderate priced piece of furniture. That stuff, we see that produced in some huge factory, lots of workers in a line, passing stuff around. But the thing about this stuff is, yeah, it looks kind of heavy for shipping, but that's not that big a deal. We just put that in a container. So what if it takes a little while to get from one place to the other? It's a standardized thing, can sit in inventory. Okay, and so what's happening is that kind of stuff, which is standardized, can go wherever the labor is cheapest, all right, and just be shipped in as needed, all right. And this is the kind of thing that's going to be made in some big, huge plant because it's standardized. Whereas the custom stuff, where we require maybe face-to-face communication with creating this product, or quick turnover. It's custom, so you don't have it in inventory, and there's going to be incentive for that to be nearby. All right, and so you can sort of, what is this theory going to predict? Well, those big, huge plants that were making wood furniture that was standardized, they're the ones that are going to be vulnerable to competition from China. And the smaller craft-oriented guys are the ones that are going to actually survive. Okay? So that's the theory. How well does that theory work? All right, so now I have to see if I can actually, if I know how to advance this. Yeah, okay, so here's the theory. Well, let me just say, it works, okay, in the sense that, it's almost uniformly big plants got knocked out, right? And in particular, those big plants that were in the North Carolina Piedmont region, all right? Where did they come from in the first place? Well, last century, those kind of plants were up in Pennsylvania and New England and moved to North Carolina, right, because labor costs were lower, all right? And now they've moved from North Carolina to China because labor costs are lower. Okay, so you want to think about it as China is the new North Carolina. All right, but just in terms of the numbers, what can we say? Here's just a couple of industries. Wood furniture. Back in 1997, there were 5 plants in the High Point area. If you're familiar with wood furniture, you recognize that, with more than 1,000 employees. Fast forward 10 years. There are no such plants. Infants cut and sew apparel, right? So this is kind of standardized goods. You line up all these people sitting in front of a sewing machine, maybe hundreds of people cutting away. In this time period, 97% of that industry has gone. House slippers. In 97, we had 26 of these plants. By 2010, there's only 1 plant in this industry in the whole country, and it has between 1 and 4 employees, yet the census still just sort of keeps it around. It's an industry. It just happens to be there's only 1 left. Now, okay, so now let's, sometimes, with economists, it's on the one hand, on the other hand. So is there another hand here? Well, let me just give you this one other, exception. In 2007, there is actually a plant in this country with more than 2,500 employees that's classified as wood furniture. All right, so it sounds like, what's the story with that? Okay, well, point 1, it's not in the North Carolina region. In fact, it's in Wisconsin. How do I know about this, by the way? This is public census information. You can just go look up where they list plants. They list counts of plants by different employment size categories. And you can find that from the census records, there's 1 plant in Acadia, Wisconsin with more than 2,500 employees. Well, you can use public sources to figure out what it is. It's Ashley Furniture. Okay, so then you can just say, well, I'm going to go to Ashley Furniture and find some of that American-made wood furniture. Well, I took a trip, asked the guy about, show me that American-made wood furniture, and he looks at me funny. You pick it up, made in Malaysia, made in China. What's going on? This plant has, it's their headquarters. It has, among the 2,500 employees there plus is the president and the, finance officers. I went into the website to see what kind of jobs they were looking for. They were looking for a social networking specialist in the marketing department. Okay. Now it turns out they do make something there, right? Upholstered furniture. They take a kits, right? They get and they can pull it over, right? Over this, plywood and foam, right? And that goes out the door, and that's how this thing ended up in manufacturing, right? But again, where is that cut and sew, the fabric coming from? It's coming from China, right? They have an operation over there with thousands of employees cutting it up, setting it up, sewing it together, and getting to here, okay? Now, that's because it's coming from China because, when you shop at this place, they don't give you really any choices about what your fabric you want. So if you want one of those little higher-end places, well, then that'll come from Mexico. All right. The point is, this is perfectly consistent with my Econ 101 model, that this is still here because it's not a bunch of unskilled workers touching goods with their hands. Okay. Otherwise, it's gone. Okay. So labor-intensive stuff, gone. Capital-intensive stuff, okay, well, in many cases still here. What's that? Just robots replacing the workers, right? So, I mean, you've got, so some of those big plants that were over 2,500 employees, they're still around. It's just, instead of the workers, they're the robots, right? So here's a picture. That's that St. Paul plant we were talking about, and just workers up and down like a football field, right? Now it's just robots, right? Just for further evidence, we can look and see the new plants. What if we go look between 1997 and 2007 and look at the new plants that have shown up? It turns out that are big. Okay, so there are 2,500 such plants. Excuse me. Big by the definition that they have at least 2,500 employees. There are 15 such plants, okay? 5 of them are auto business, right? Easy to understand. 4 of them are meat packing. Okay, that sounds a little funny because these are a bunch of unskilled workers hacking away at meat. But when you think about the transportation costs, then it perfectly fits. We've got all these pigs and cattle, and it'd be a big pain to send them to China. And then maybe, get it back, you worry about eating it or something. So it's understandable. And when I talk about this in my Econ 1101 class, the engineers come up and just say, yeah, we're working on that. The machines, it's a little bit harder to get a machine to take the meat off than it is to paint a car, but it's coming. And we know what's going to happen next. Okay. So manufacturing is mobile and seeks the lowest cost. But what about policy, right? So let's just, we don't have that much time, but let's just get into it, okay? I mean, put another way, are we all set? The labor-intensive, low transportation cost industries, yeah, they're going to go. But can we just count on having the capital skill-intensive industries, the auto industries and so forth? Well, I want to put out this claim. I think we can't take it for granted. I think policy does matter. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time, most of the time I have left, just talking about labor market policies because that's what I've worked on more, into unions. Okay, so here's a good question, though. Are manufacturers still running from unions? Now, I wrote this paper back in published it in 98, right, which looked at the effect of right-to-work laws on manufacturing location. Now, a right-to-work law is anti-union because what it does is it makes it illegal to force somebody to have to, a worker to have to pay the union dues. So unions hate this because, well, some of the people free ride, they don't pay. Okay, so they get less money. All right, I mean, union, the concept of union is everybody's together, and here these guys are going off not paying. Right, and so what I found in this whole earlier paper is you can actually, well, first of all, these laws started getting passed right after the World War II. Okay, and it ended up being the entire Confederacy and the Plain States, North Dakota, they passed it, mountain states, right? And then the rest of, like here, not right to work, right? And so what I was able to find was when you look right at the border, when you go to the Confederacy and the policy changes, you can right away also increasing. So it'll cut both ways.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly true. They're going to start consuming the things we consume. The issue is, can they make them after transport costs are included? Of course, now the transport costs are the other direction. We would have to make it here and ship it over there. Whether they can make it at equal quality at lower costs, I can see that happening. I mean, I don't think anyone here is ready to buy a Chinese car yet, but it's possible that they'll get up to the quality level. You know, you think about what people thought of a Hyundai car in the late 1980s, to imagine that now people are perfectly happy to buy a luxury Hyundai automobile. That's quite a impressive feat in 2 decades. And if the Chinese can do that, well, they might be able to satisfy their own high-quality demand.
But to add to that, I mean, it's very difficult for American and Western firms to sell in China, right? You have to go in and you have to do joint ventures and so forth. So
they're basically forcing the transfer of quality technology into the Chinese manufacturers' hands.
What is the most important thing that you've learned from studying manufacturing? Now, I know that's a very subjective question, and there can be technically lots of different answers, but if you could say one thing,
boy,
what would it be?
That's tough. Tom goes first on this one.
okay, can I just repeat that Econ 1101 works? That when you know, it looks like there's puzzles, but when you dig deep and you sort of marshal all the different facts of the case, I mean, the forces of the market are very strong, and you know, people go to where it's cheapest, and we have to always remember that.
I'd like to give that answer, and that is my truthful answer. That's the most important thing, to not just say ditto. I think the importance of productivity, that's something I study in a lot of different contexts, but I think to explain what happens over long periods of time with manufacturing, understanding how productivity works is really key.
Sure, yeah. Okay.
Hello, my name is Muhan Yan. I'm a student here. I took Professor Hurwicz's class 4 years ago, and 4 years later, awesome as always. So as a Chinese student who are majoring in economics, the manufacturing business is particularly interesting to me. So I'm just wondering, as the professor said, the wage of Chinese employee is increasing, and it started to rising to like developed country level. But I think it's going to take a while for Chinese employees to reach the wage like to American level. So is the government really trying to get this job manufacturing back to the United States? Because that means like people are going to have to pay more for products, relatively speaking. So is the government really trying to get it back? And what exactly, is there any procedure or something that they're really doing to get them back?
You're talking about the U.S. government?
Yes.
I mean, there's been some proposals, but I don't really think anything that they're doing has had any big effect on what we've seen so far. There's been, many things proposed, including, for example, a tax break for manufacturers, which Tom's example of Panera Bread is the best argument against that idea I've ever heard. Like, everyone's going to call themselves a manufacturer if you start cutting taxes just for manufacturers. But aside from that, I don't think you're worried about, or you express some notion of what's going to happen to whether the goods get cheaper or more expensive. Forget the government. Companies take care of that. They know they'll sell less if stuff is too expensive. So they want to make it where it's cheapest. They're not going to move it back until they think they can make it here, inclusive of transport costs and adjusting for any quality differential, cheaper than they can somewhere else. So by the time it gets moved back, unless there's been massive intervention in the market, which hasn't happened yet, it's going to be on at least a quality adjusted basis, cheaper than you could make it somewhere else. So I don't think you'll see customers paying more as a result of this shift back if it continues to occur.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think what's we're not levying tariffs and protectionism, right? But you know, things are happening in this country to make it more competitive, right? And the biggest one, I mean, is what's happening in the labor markets, right? So we had all these unions, and a lot of them are disappearing, and wages are coming down. But even the unionized plants are they're not your father's union. I mean, they're two-tiered wages, where the new young people coming in are getting half of what the other people are paying. So when Chad is showing us what's happening in labor costs, it's not just productivity going up. But like you know, Jeff Immelt, we're talking about him at GE. You know, he's bringing jobs back, even to union plants, right? But these are you know, half the wage of the people that are in there. So that's kind of what, when we're talking about manufacturing coming back, it's not because of you know, barriers being put up, but I think because it's becoming more competitive to produce here.
V.V. Jari, Economics Department, Minnesota. I'm going to make a case, but try and phrase it in the form of a question to live by Zenus's rules. Why aren't the trends that you guys documented something to be celebrated rather than to be bemoaned? From a longer perspective of history, the whole point of getting rich is to make routine jobs that are handled by machines or perhaps by people who don't have other opportunities rather than yourself, right? So who knows how many Mozarts we lost because the guys were just busy, you know, tilling the soil. Now, not everybody has to till the soil. In exactly the same way, why isn't the movement of routine manufacturing to low-wage countries which can do that kind of stuff more cheaply and better and allow us to become possibly Mozarts or something else, or I don't know, the Beatles or something, I suppose. Why isn't that something that we ought to be celebrating?
Absolutely.
That's the stuff that to some extent puzzles me. And it's related, I think, to Chad's thing about so there's a case for policy that Chad made a little bit, which is there may be these agglomeration externalities, and there's evidence perhaps in R&D. But the question is that 70% of R&D something that's going into routine manufacturing, or is it something that's going into the next generation of products that we are going to be producing, that we are going to have comparative advantage in, and by subsidizing manufacturing broadly defined, aren't we going to distort that process of natural and desirable process of development?
Well, let me just add to this. I was talking a lot about this change, but I mean, I would have been happy to hand out party hats, right? At some level, it is progress, right? It's dirty. I mean, just talk about the future of meatpacking, right? So right now we do have, 1,000 people hacking away. When we have those machines come in and replace them, that will be progress, right? So in no sense when I was talking was I worry. All right, but let's move forward. I do think that when we talk about making semiconductors, that's just robots and a bunch of high-skilled people, that if somehow that leaves, I think we have to ask, well, why is that leaving? And think about what distortions would cause it to leave if we're, the tax policy or labor policy or so forth. So, that's kind of what, and because of some maybe connection between the innovation and the making. And there may be some externalities with innovation, and it is closely connected. I mean, if you look at Intel and all the semiconductor makers, the innovators are right next to a factory. In every case, there is no innovation that's not next to a factory. So if there's a distortion that causes the factory to leave, then maybe the innovator will leave. And then you can say, well, fine, we'll just do finance. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's fine.
No,
The UK's tried that.
Okay, now,
I think semiconductors are an excellent example of the new model, where you have very few workers actually hand knitting anything. There are really no blue-collar workers in semiconductor plants. It's mostly engineers and big, expensive, capital-intensive fabrication equipment. And I think that's the model. And instead of semiconductor fabs, you have robots that are doing things. And I think the whole 3D printing is, at least in the next 10 years, is more of a rapid prototyping capability as opposed to a real manufacturing technology. But the point is that semiconductors looks like what manufacturing will really look like in the next decade.
And just to follow up with what Tom said, I hope I left enough, I don't know, ambiguity or exit ramps to suggest I didn't think that we needed some comeback or that it was bad that things left in the first place, because I think largely it is just a reflection of progress, the same way as the de-agriculturalization of the workforce was. Until I was actually on the National Academies panel, that's all I thought. I just wanted to be, I was on that first conference call, I just wanted to scream, 60 years of progress, people, we're done, and then hang up. But actually, the more time I spent learning about the way manufacturing is done now, I started thinking a little bit more about these agglomeration effects. And it is true that, the co-location of manufacturing and research is very common, and it's probably for some fundamental economic reason. So I don't want to just dismiss it and say everything's fine, but at the same time, I don't think it's 60 years of tragedy by any means. I think, and again, every other country that's gotten wealthy enough has seen the hump on the share of employment in manufacturing turn over, and so it seems like a very natural part of economic growth.
Okay, one more question.
But isn't manufacturing just a really key area of wealth creation in a country? If we don't have manufacturing, where's the wealth going to be created?
Well, I think you can make wealth from services production too. I mean, if you think about, I've got a colleague who says, think about someone who mows your lawn. Why is the person who mows your lawn inherently less valuable than the person who made the lawnmower? Services do provide value and create value, even separate from physical objects. I think the case for manufacturing per se has to be tied to some sort of spillover, where if it's not done here, something else wouldn't happen that would create value otherwise. Other than that, I'm not so concerned about the particular locations in which goods are made. And that's why I brought up the agglomeration stuff.
yeah.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your being here. You're coming up. And you're going to tell them about the reception.
A couple of things. Thank you all for, I'm V.V. Chari. I'm director of the Heller-Hurwicz Economics Institute. Thank you all for coming out. We're pleasantly surprised at the great turnout. I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. The first announcement is that on May 29th at 3:30 p.m., place to be determined, we will be having our next Heller-Hurwicz Economics Institute event. It'll feature Christine Cummings, who's first executive vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and Mark Olson, who's a governor of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. That event is being done jointly with the Economics Club of Minnesota. The second thing is, for those of you who have been invited to the reception, we will move over there and find some refreshments. I know Tom, Chad, and Zenas are looking forward to that. But thank you very much. Let's give them one hand for a phenomenal event. Thank you.